The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return, sponsored by Narconon Ojai.
Hello, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and I'm the host for this podcast. This is episode number 178. When a person is addicted to drugs and or alcohol, the myriad of choices of treatments can be overwhelming. Narconon Ojai is a proven residential treatment facility that addresses the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of addiction with an evidence-based, step-by-step program designed to free those trapped by addiction. For more information, call 1-866-231-5924. Today's episode will be an interview with a gentleman named Aaron Garcia. Aaron Garcia is an evangelist, international speaker, best-selling author of the book Coincidence or God, and #1 bestseller of his newest book, Burn Notice. He's the founder of S.O.S Ministries, Inc., a nonprofit that is dedicated to improving the community and reaching the lost in the streets. Aaron is known for creating multiple movements such as the Broadway Bash, Washington Family Hope Center, and United at the Stadium. He travels all over the globe, specifically to unreached countries where the gospel isn't preached, sharing his story and seeing people come to Christ. Aaron, his wife, and 3 children all reside in Neosho, Missouri. Without further ado, let's talk to Aaron Garcia. Aaron Garcia, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to meet you.
Well, and I really thank you, and I really appreciate, people who have a background such as yours who are willing to share their story, because I think it's the stories that we tell on this podcast that resonate with people. And I always figure if just one person hears your story and can relate to you, maybe they'll reach out for hope. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Absolutely.
So tell me, in the kind of way we usually do it here on the podcast, how did you get started down the road to addiction?
Sure. So my story really starts at age 16. I grew up in a good Christian home. I came from some parents who, wanted what was best for me. They wanted me to make A's and B's. I was involved in sports and all kinds of different things. But at age 16, my parents wanted to purchase my first vehicle for me. And I'll never forget, it was a Toyota Tercel. So if you had to think of a Toyota Tercel, it's kind of like a Prius nowadays. It was a small little cherry red vehicle. But what was best was it was all mine. And my parents said, well, as long as you pay for the insurance and the gasoline, we'll purchase your first vehicle. Well, what happened was that as I had this vehicle, I started understanding I had independence. And people kind of latched on to that independence. They wanted what I had to represent, which was freedom. Because I was 16 years of age, and at that time, I'm 38 now, there's not a lot of kids who either parents had enough money to buy the vehicle for them or even was of age to have a vehicle. And so my parents bought my first vehicle for me. It was that Toyota Tercel, and my mind began to change. I started thinking things were about popularity and being recognized and all those different things. But what I started to understand was that bad people came with all that independence. And when I was 16 years of age, I actually was invited to this house. And at this house, there were, I'll never forget that there was drapes over the house, like sheets over the windows when we were coming up to the front door. And that intuition you have, like, something's not right.
This does not look good.
Yeah. Like, if there was like a wrong way sign, it should have been placed right on the front door. But my buddy said to me, he said, whatever happens here tonight, you don't repeat or tell anybody about what happens.
Right. Aaron, what part of the country did you grow up in? Where were you at this point?
I live in Joplin, Missouri. I've been born and raised here. So Joplin is the very center of the United States. Most people know about the tornado that came through here back in 2011.
Okay.
So it was in Joplin, Missouri, where all this was taking place. And so I walked through the front door, and the people there were very nice. They were playing card games, kind of hanging out. The lights were dim. and they were all snorting a substance off of these mirrors, and they were all using methamphetamines in this household. My buddy who was using was telling them not to give me the drugs, but after my curiosity kept taking over, they ended up giving me the drugs anyway. And I'm not a smoker, but I went through like a whole pack of cigarettes in like 30 minutes. And I rushed myself to the bathroom and I vomited in the toilet because, my mind was just racing. But I was having flights of ideas, and I thought this was just a really awesome drug is what I thought. Before that, I actually was using a little bit of marijuana, a little bit of alcohol, but I didn't start getting into drugs until I was at age 16. So I started using drugs experimentally. I was using them basically maybe on the weekends. I was hanging out with friends. We'd go out all weekend long, and then, during the week, we'd kind of go to school. My behavior began to change, though. I started skipping class, and my relationship with my parents started changing, and I became defiant. I didn't want to do the things that my parents wanted me to do. I didn't want to do my schoolwork like I used to want to. And so what happened was that more wrong motives came into my life. And I, at age 16, ran away from home for the first time. And my parents had called the police on me. They knew that I was hanging out at friends' houses. They knew the friends that I was kind of hanging out with at the time. And the police came down the steps of my friend's house where I was hanging out at to hide out. And they handcuffed me down there. They took me to juvenile detention. I was a kid. I was never in trouble whatsoever. And, they put me into a cell. I remember I walked down the cell block, and it was completely pitch black in that place. They turned the lights on just to walk me down the hallway, but then they turned the lights out, and it was just pitch black. And there was all these men who were chattering through the walls, and they were, calling me all kinds of names. They were stirring me up. And I started having fear in my heart. I started becoming intimidated. I was scared of where my life was already going. I've never been in jail before.
Why would they put you in jail? I mean, because of suspected drug use, or?
Well, luckily they didn't get me for drug use whatsoever. But what happens is when you're age 16 in the state of Missouri, they have to take you down to juvenile detention overnight and then kind of work out the kinks between you and the parents. That way you don't just, they drop you back off of your parents and then you run away again. So
wow.
they took me to juvenile detention, I guess, as like a punishment. And so you went to juvenile detention. That's when me and my parents, we started butting heads. We really were not getting along after that. My parents came back the next day at the juvenile detention to pick me up, and then they took me home. I didn't say anything the entire way home. And you would think that would be the end. Like that, I would change my life. I would know that I was going down the wrong path. I was skipping class. Well, there was a rumor going around the classroom, around the school actually, and where I went to Joplin High School, and there was 2,000 students that went to this high school. So it's a very large high school, freshman all the way to senior. And there was a rumor going around the school that someone was going to blow the school up on May 5th. Now, this is right after the Columbine shooting. So I want to give you that perspective of understanding how recent the events were and how serious the events were. So the Columbine shooting had just happened. We heard a rumor that someone was going to blow the school up on May 5th. And through my drug-induced mind, I thought during 6th hour, it would be funny to write a bomb threat on a desk that said I was going to blow the school up on May 5th. And I wrote it in pencil. I should have erased it, but I was so, again, drug-induced to my mind, I couldn't comprehend that I needed to erase that message. Yeah.
Oh my God, Aaron. I'm like, oh no. Okay.
So I completely forgot about it, right? So the next day in first hour, I skipped class. I went and smoked some pot with some friends, hanging out with some more friends. And I came back to second hour and was study hall. So I'm sitting at the back of study hall and I'm thinking sleep. I just want to sleep. I don't want to do any schoolwork or anything like that. And there's a principal's note came into the classroom, and they called me to the front and they said, Aaron, the principal wants to see you. And so I thought, skipping class, maybe they found some drugs in my locker. I don't know, something like that. And so I'll never forget, I was walking down the hallway and I turned the corner towards the principal's office, and all the principal's offices have windows. So you can see inside the office all the way through. And when I turned the corner, it was like the entire Joplin Police Department was set up in the principal's office. And my mom was in the corner with the principal with her arms crossed and just the most infuriated look on her face with her arms crossed that I'd ever seen. And I was wondering, why is my mom here? Why are there so many police officers here? And I sit down, the principal sits me down, they close the door behind me. They say, Aaron, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place right now. And I was like, what are you talking about? He says, what did you do yesterday? And I said, well, and I try to calculate everything I was doing. And it was like it hit me that I wrote that message on that desk. He said, someone in 7th hour saw the message on the desk and turned it into us. And I basically admitted to the bomb threat on this desk. It wasn't a verbal, but it was a message written in pencil. And so they were doing some talking, and the prosecuting attorneys there wanted to make a spectacle of me, and they wanted to put me away in jail for 1 year.
Oh my God! And you're still 16 years old.
I'm almost 17 at this time. I'm still a 16-year-old boy. Oh, never gotten in any trouble besides that runaway, and. There's so much emotions that happen during that time where your mind is just turning. Like, how do I back out of this one? And my mom is like in tears, like she's just crying, and the principals are just shaking their heads at me. And so that they come in, they handcuff me, and wouldn't you know, the bell rang for the next hour in the high school whenever they were walking me out into the hallway. And so everybody saw Aaron Garcia being handcuffed and walked by police officers out of the building, and everyone was like whispering, Aaron, what's going on? What happened? Like nobody had a clue. And they put me into the van of the police department van, and I felt like when I was in the van, I was looking at the handle of the door, and I wanted to jump. I just wanted to get out because it was like one of those nightmares that had come to life. So they take me downtown. They take me into the city jail. Now I'm 16, but they got me in the city jail now. Now they got me myself because I'm 16. I'm still a young boy, and they couldn't put me with adults and things like that. So for 2 weeks, they left me in the cell by myself. I had to make statements. I had to hire a lawyer. It cost me like $10,000 in lawyer fees. I had to do 200 hours of community service. But by the grace of God, my lawyer got it from what would have been like a bomb threat to a verbal assault, just a misdemeanor that was not going to be permanently on my record. So that right there alone should cease anybody from that kind of behavior and that drug addiction.
There could have been a wake-up call, but not, huh?
But not. And so I did momentarily put drugs off to the side, but I went through high school probably another year or so, and then I barely graduated by the skin of my teeth. I was still kind of skipping class, still hanging out with people, like partying, like alcohol and a little bit of marijuana. But I kind of put the hard drugs off, the methamphetamines. I was using LSD. I'd use cocaine. I was using all those different drugs in different settings with different people. So after high school, my parents wanted me to go to college. And me being the still immature kid that I was, I just didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to do the things that my parents wanted me to do because our relationship still was not 100%. So I was working some dead-end jobs. I was working at some restaurants, and I met some people, and I met this guy, and he said, Aaron, I'd like for you to come to my house and hang out one of these nights. And so that next week I made the decision to go to this guy's house, and I figured, a hangout spot, maybe a little bit of alcohol or, some girls would be there and different things like that. So I was excited to get over to this house. And I opened the door to this house. It was a duplex, and it was on a main road, a fairly main road with lots of traffic. And it was a duplex, and his room was downstairs into a basement. And down in this basement, there was a bedroom, there was a living room, there was a bar right in front of the bathroom. And so he invited me down the stairs. And as I'm walking down the stairs, the carpet was red, walking down these stairs. Very, very different, right? Like bright red. And then the furniture downstairs was black. And I called it the Devil's Den because I felt like it was the exact place where the enemy would stay. And so I turned the corner of this devil's den, and sure enough, everyone down there was using methamphetamines.
Wow.
They were smoking on their pipes. Some were shooting up. Others were snorting lines off the mirror. And he invited me over to the bar, which is the very far distant part of the downstairs. And again, that intuition of, I'm in the wrong place. I should not be here. But me being the naive kid that I am, just fell right back into my addiction.
Wow. And you're 17 now, right?
Yeah, I was actually probably at this time 18.
18? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because I graduated high school, kind of working a little bit. So the place was a drug house, I found out. At first, mom was upstairs, sister was upstairs. Mom was an addict, sister was an alcoholic, and then he was a meth addict. So some time went on. We were hanging out. We were having such a good time. We were using drugs. We were having so much chemistry, me and this guy. And he asked me to move into this house. And this would be kind of the turning point of my life, where I had to make the decision. Was I going to just continue living the life I was living, working some dead-end jobs, or was I going to move into a drug house? And me being, again, drug induced, was like, yeah, let's move in together. Like, that sounds amazing. And so I went and grabbed all my stuff. I moved in, and it would be probably the darkest moments of my life. Not only was this a drug house, but there were manufacturing methamphetamines as well.
Oh, okay.
So there were cooks in this place. We were connected to other cocaine dealers, and we're not talking about small fry cocaine dealers here. We're talking about men who were moving large amounts of weight, kilos of cocaine. And at first, drugs were fun. Like, I was having a blast, right? I was using drugs. They promoted me to start dealing drugs. I was manipulating people. I was prideful. I'd make people do what I wanted them to do. I could get any girl I wanted to, because I was moving up in the ranks as a drug dealer, and I was becoming one of the largest drug dealers in Joplin, Missouri at the time. We were moving to different houses. We were manufacturing. We were trading methamphetamines for cocaine, because you see, we were carrying some of the best products. We had pure methamphetamines. We didn't cut our drugs. We didn't try to make more money. We wanted more power. So that means we had to have more powerful drugs. And I was getting connected to some high-end drug dealers. They liked me. We had, again, good chemistry. They could trust me. When you get into this kind of environment, there's not a lot of people that you trust, because at any point in time, if you get busted, we're talking years, if not decades, that you're going to be put away for the amount of drugs that you had and the manufacturing. I believe in the state of Missouri, it's 25 years to life if you get caught with a meth house.
Wow.
Or a lab, I mean.
Yeah.
So everything was fun. I was having a blast. I was selling drugs. I had money. I had all kinds of women that wanted to be with me. I had men that wanted to be me. So from a worldly type view, you find yourself as successful. Like, this is the life I'm supposed to live. I'm having fun. I'm having, all of these worldly things at my fingertips. But one night we went to this house about 20 minutes away at nighttime, and it was his uncle's house, one of the manufacturer's uncle's house, and he was a drug. What's crazy is that you have drug addicts who have family members who are drug addicts. It's almost like a generational curse.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, oh.
Yeah, we've seen that before so often. I mean, not always, but we've definitely seen it before, where the father or the mother is either an alcoholic or an addict. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And so we were cooking out of his house, down in the basement of his house. So I was like the cleaner, if you will. So I would clean all the utensils, all the flasks, all the different things that need to be cleaned beforehand and afterhand. So, but this evening, drugs that used to be fun for me, something came over me, and I can't really tell you what it was. I think to this date, I believe that I became possessed, is what I believe. But I went from having fun and enjoying myself, never having any paranoia or anything like that, and like something came over me, and I thought the police were there, and I thought that everyone was out to get me. I don't know how to explain it because it happened in like an instant. It
And
wasn't
you're
like
still doing drugs in addition to selling them and making them, right? You're still doing the drugs.
Absolutely. So even when you're manufacturing methamphetamines, the fumes in the air will get you high. So yeah, I was using and I was inhaling the fumes. But the problem is that I never had this issue before. I was having fun, and then all of a sudden, bam! This evening, I freaked out. So they're scrambling. They don't know what's going on. Why is Aaron talking about the police are here? They're outside. Why is he not? Why don't someone just shut him up? Is what they were saying. So they made one of the girls get me in my car and basically drive me to my house, back to my house, get me out of that environment. They can't handle it because it's very intense when you're in this moment. Because at any point in time, police could kick down the door. All you need is an informant or someone to say something to. So we pulled into this Flying J, this pilot truck stop, and I thought that everybody that crossed across my vehicle was a police officer or an informant or anything like that. I was just freaked out. I even thought my driver was undercover. I mean, it was just this intense fear that I'd never had before. And so she drove me back to my house. Well, the next day, everyone came over to my house and was questioning me. Why are you thinking like this? Because again, you're dealing with some high-end drug dealers. It's like, okay, what's the problem? I mean, are you guilty of something? Are you talking to the police behind our backs? So not only am I having paranoia and fear in my heart, but I'm having people question me at the same time, and I'm having to basically,
I mean, they're paranoid and fearful now of you, so they get to add their paranoia onto your paranoia, and
it's like everyone's freaking out on everybody. So it was chaotic. So this went on for months, and I lived.
Aaron, when you say your house, do you mean like back with your parents, or you had your own house?
No, the Devil's Den. I was at
the Devil's Den. Okay, that was your house. Mm-hmm. Okay, got it.
Yep, that was my house that I was living in currently after I'd moved out of my parents' house and into this house. So my mind was not right. I was no longer having fun with drugs. And I remember there was a moment where I went to my parents. It was my grandma's birthday party. And this was kind of an eye-opener for my family because no one really knew what Aaron was doing. Aaron just wasn't around like he used to be. And I went to my grandmother's birthday party, and there was all my family members there. And we were in the back room, and I just kept hearing my family talk about me. I thought they were like saying they're going to call the police and all kinds of different things. And so I ran out of that back room and I ran into the living room where everybody was sitting and they were getting ready to, sing happy birthday and cut the cake and all that. And I said, "You're all against me. You're all after me." I said, "I'm leaving and I'm never coming back." Like those were my words. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? And so I raced out the front door. Well, my father chased me out the front door. And so I'm like almost jogging. I'm fast pacing, walking down the street. And I told my dad, I said, "I'm never coming back. You'll never see your son again." And I'd never seen my dad cry before, like ever. And he just lost it. I mean, he just started to bawl. Like the idea that you're never going to see your son again just really shook him. And it was the moment I knew my addiction was pouring over into my family. It was starting not only to hurt me, but it was hurting my family. And he said, "Well, let me at least give you a ride back to your house." He knew then that I was on drugs. My family then knew I was on drugs. And so he drove me back to the drug house, dropped me off. And I fell right back into my addiction, and it continued. It did not stop. I lost weight. I lost quite a bit of weight over time. See, the drugs were not only, I was not just using to get high, but it was making me malnourished. I wasn't eating like I should. I had sores all over my face from picking and different things like that. Again, because drugs weren't fun for me anymore. It was like a vice. It was becoming just this torture chamber for me. And I tried committing myself into a psych ward, and all the drug dealers kept putting drugs in my face, saying, "You don't need that. Here's what you need." I mean, insanity is really what it was.
So what was your wake-up call? What was your point of no return?
So the point of no return came whenever I was in the devil's den, and the place was always full of people, like constant drug-induced people who were using. No one was sleeping. Everyone was just trying to get high. And I was in the middle of the devil's den. Someone had borrowed my car to go make a drug deal, and I was in this place, and it was empty. And there was this point of my life where I knew that I was at rock bottom. Like, there was no doubt in my mind. I said, I'm either going to die here. I'm either going to be put away in prison for life. And that was the two things that just kept circulating through my brain. I just knew that there was no way out. Point of no return, literally. So something supernatural, and this is what I want people to hear, because this is something that you don't hear a whole lot. I mean, you do hear some stories like this, but it's just such a powerful moment where this weight, like, it almost came up over my shoulders. And I didn't know God at the time. You know, my parents, we kind of went to church when I was younger, but I was never involved. I never really cared. I just doodled in the back. And I didn't know God, but something came over me in the middle of this drug house. And these words came out of my mouth. I said, God, if you're real, and I got tears just streaming in my eyes. I said, if you're real, I need you to come into my life, and I need you to change it forever. And it would be the one sentence prayer that I would say. So 3 days passed. I knew it was 3 days, but I didn't know if I was using. I didn't know if I was getting high, but I knew it was 3 days. And I woke up out of this amnesia after saying this prayer, and the people that invited me into the devil's den were pointing their finger in my face, and they were enraged. And they said, get out of here. They said, you don't belong here anymore. And I'm sitting there going, where am I supposed to go? I'm homeless. Like, I don't have I can't go home. My parents will never accept me there, you know?
Yeah.
And they said, it doesn't matter. You don't belong here. And like, all the people, all the drug addicts were there. It was a very embarrassing moment. And I'll never forget, I had, of my life, this powerful drug dealer, I had a trash bag of my life. And I threw the trash bag over my shoulder. I was sobbing. And it's funny to me now because I'm going, wait, I asked to get out of this situation. And now I'm being thrown out of this situation. And now I don't want to leave.
That's right. And they basically what they were saying was truth. You don't belong there, and you didn't belong there, and you kind of sort of knew it almost, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. For more information on our sponsor, Narconon Ojai, visit their website at narcononojai.org. That's NARCONONOJAI.org. Or call 1-866-231-5924. That's 1-866-231-5924. Sometimes, the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
And so I got in my car, and there was something inside my car that said, Aaron, go home. You'll find safety there. And so I pulled up my mom's front door. I went back to my parents' house. I showed up at the front door. I rang the doorbell, and my mom answers the door, and she didn't even recognize her own son. And I said, Mom, it's me. Like, let me in. And she just gasped. I mean, she could not believe the situation I was in. I was just in a bad spot. I didn't even look healthy. I was malnourished. She called me a walking corpse. That's what she called me.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to sit down in my parents' couch. I'd been up for like a week on drugs. I mean, I was hallucinating. I was beyond all repair. And I asked my mom if I could move back in. And she said, absolutely not. Look at the condition you're in. You need rehab. You need this, that, and this, right? And I'm hallucinating. I'm not really right in my mind. I don't even know what's going on. I don't even know how I got to my parents' house. And my dad's in the background, and he's looking at me, and you can obviously tell that he's almost crying again because he's seeing his own son, his firstborn, and I'm in the shape that I'm in. My dad said to my mom, he says, well, he's our son. Like, we can't leave him like this. Look at him. And my mom says, fine. If he gets clean, he can stay here. And so I had to make the decision that night to stay there and get clean and not use. And so 3 days went by. I went through withdrawals. I was trembling. I was shaking. I wasn't eating still. And after 3 days, this was the turning point for my life. I looked at my phone, and there were voice messages and text messages of everybody who wanted me to come back to that old life. And I shattered my phone in an instant.
Wow.
And ever since that
day. Good move. So you didn't do any kind of formal treatment? You just stopped?
Cold turkey.
Wow. That's quite amazing, because you were doing methamphetamine pretty regularly, right? That was your drug of choice?
Yes, that was pretty much all I was doing. A little cocaine, basically methamphetamines. But yeah, statistics say that only 11% of people ever get out of meth addiction.
Yeah.
So it's very rare.
Yeah. But you did it without any sort of treatment. Wow. So you just basically just had kind of the love of your family and God looking after you at that point.
Yeah, I had an encounter with the Lord. And so when I had the encounter with the Lord, everything started to change. Now, here's the deal. Things didn't happen overnight, right? So I had to figure out who Aaron was again. I went through anxiety and depression, and because all I knew was being high. So being sober was a new thing for me. But I knew that I didn't want to go back to that old life. I had so much fear in my heart that I didn't want to go back to that old life. And so I started, working again, back to some dead-end jobs. And but I started praying a little bit. And, I didn't put the pieces together because I went from a drug addict to being in the middle of a devil's den, which is complete darkness in that place. I mean, so dark you couldn't see the silhouette of your hand in front of your face. It was that evil. I mean, I saw demons, and I've heard chatter and all kinds of different things. But I went from a drug addict to crying out to God in the middle of a drug house. And I want you to understand the analogy here. I'm in this drug house, a wicked, wicked man. And I cried out to the Lord, and I asked if he was real, that he would come into my life and change it forever. 3 days later, I was getting kicked out of the drug house. And then here I am now, a clean man. So it was really my resurrection. It was crying out, dead and buried. And on the third day, the Lord kicked me out. He knew that I could not get out of that situation. There's no way possible. That's what hopelessness is. It's when you come to a point in your life where you feel like there's no way out. Point of no return.
Yep. I'm going to make just a quick comment, and then I want to get into what you're doing now, and the various groups you've formed, and also the books you've written. But for listeners, if you think that God has deserted you because you are a drug addict, you could look at Aaron, and you could look at how far south he went in terms of manufacturing and selling and everything he was doing. And if God was willing to help him, he's willing to help you too. Just making a plug there for anybody listening.
Absolutely. So I'm sitting in my living room at my parents' house, and my mom worked in the medical field. She says, hey, what do you think about the medical field? I said, what about it? And so she says there's this phlebotomy class, and it's where basically you stick people with needles, right? And then you draw blood for laboratory results and stuff like that. And so she says there's some classes. Maybe you should get into those classes. I said, sure. I'll give it a shot. And so I went through phlebotomy school. It was a few months long. After that, I got a job at BioLife Plasma Services, which I don't know if you know where that's. I don't know if you guys have a plasma center in your neighborhood or not, but
Probably.
yeah. Anyways, so it's a place where you go to get plasma for medications and things like that. So I'm there, and there's these nurses, and I said, well, what do you guys do? And they said, well, Aaron, we save lives and we help people. And it was that moment that I knew that that's what I wanted to do for my life. And so I went to school. I became a registered nurse in 2008. Time went by. I did emergency medicine. I've done ICU. I've done all those different things. And I started to understand there was a calling for my life. I understand that I had purpose because, see, I used to be a life destroyer, and now I wanted to be a life saver. And so I was able to minister to people in these emergency rooms, addicts and drunks and all kinds of different things, and tell them my story, and people just being transformed in the process. And then the Lord told me, he says, I want you to go back to school. And so I went back to school again. I ended up getting my master's in 2017. I am now a board certified nurse practitioner. So it just shows you the distance that God can take you, from going from a drug addict to a phlebotomist to a registered nurse, and now I'm a nurse practitioner. And
Wow.
I work in family medicine. I take care of people. I diagnose, I treat, I prescribe legally. I can prescribe drugs. And so, and people ask me all the time, well, does those cravings or that old life, does it ever come? Do you ever have those moments? And I said, absolutely not. Because you see, I became a son when I started to understand that God was in my life. And the new life I have, the old has passed away and the new has come. And so here I am now, fulfilling in my purpose.
That's awesome. And you have different organizations and different, can I call them ministries? Is that a good term to use? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So they're ministries / nonprofits. So I gave my life to the Lord in 2012. So you understand, I'm 38 years old. I came out of addiction at age 20. So I've been clean 18 years.
Wow.
So
that's really very well done. I'm just going to say that's very, very well done.
Thank you. So that's 18 years of, a process of being transformed. It took me some time to understand that the Lord and the timeline of everything started lining up. Oh my gosh, I cried out to God in the middle of a drug house, and here I am. This is not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all, but it's a God-given destiny. So anyways, gave my life to the Lord in 2012. Things started happening to me. I went to this event. It was an evening program. And I went to this event at this church, but it wasn't a church service. It was like a reenactment of a rapture, right? And so at the very end, they asked anybody who wanted salvation to come to the front or who just needed prayer. Well, I was on fire for God because I gave my life to him in 2012, and here we are 3 months later. I'm in that honeymoon stage, right? Because you got people that are in that honeymoon stage of, I found the Lord, and then, man, I want to do everything. And I'm standing at the front of this building, not trying to pray for people because I'm wanting to do whatever it was that God had for me to do. I was just excited like a little child. And I'm standing at the front, and this is really just kind of a supernatural moment as well. And the pastor is still up there on the microphone, and there's all these people on the floor getting prayed for, and I'm the only one standing next to my friend. And the pastor is talking on his microphone, and his voice goes out. And I'm looking at my buddy, and I'm looking back to the front. I'm going, man, someone needs to turn up his microphone because it's not working. He's on the microphone talking, but you can't hear a word he's saying. And it wouldn't be, but the moment I said that, this rush of wind came up from right behind me. And I said, that's weird. I said, I'm not cold, but I feel something there. And I'm looking around this church, and there's 60-foot vaulted ceilings. There ain't no air conditioning units next to me. And as I'm processing this, the wind gets stronger. And my eyes filled with tears. I looked to my buddy, and he said, Aaron, are you okay? And I go, dude, he's here. God is tangibly touching me right now. So he grips me, he grabs me, and I'm sizzling bacon in his arms. I'm I'm just full blown gone, right? So that goes on for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. And then the intensity went away, and I had this, the best way I can describe it's pure euphoria. It was peace and joy that I'd never had in my entire life, higher than any high I'd ever been. And I was running around this church like a madman going, how can nobody want this? How can nobody want this? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I did that for like an hour. And so we get in the car and my friends are like, dude, you're different. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, man, but I just feel so good right now. And it was like they said I was like glowing or something like that. But anyways, so 3 months pass and I'm in church and I'm in the youth ministry, like hanging out with, I was a leader in the young adult ministry at my church. And I heard a voice. And this is about 3 months after I had that encounter. And the voice said, Aaron, I need you outside these four walls. And I'm sitting there like, wait a second. Whoa. Like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. Who said that? And I'm looking around the church and nobody's paying attention to me. You know, I mean, and so for 3 months, I heard this voice only in church. Get outside those four walls of the church. And I'm telling my wife, I'm like, babe, you need to pray for me or something, because either Satan's out to get me or I'm back in that fear mode. Someone's talking about me. So my buddy calls me up and he says, Aaron, I believe that the Lord spoke to me. He wants me to grab you and we're supposed to go to the streets and feed people. And so I'm like, that moment where you knew that you knew that you knew that's what you're supposed to do. And I said, yeah. And so he came over to our house. We stacked up 30-sack lunches of sandwiches, a big cookie, some chips. It was December of 2014. It was cold outside, and we hit the streets with these 30-sack lunches. And we pulled into this alleyway, and there were all these homeless people and poor people waiting to receive a meal. And I looked at my friends and my wife, and I said, all right, guys, time's now. It's time to get out of this vehicle. And I get out of the vehicle, and these people like bum rush me, right? I have all this food, and we had some coats and things like that. And they were handing them food, and they started asking for prayer. And I started praying for people, and like ears started opening up and backs started getting healed. And I stepped back out of the crowd because I'm overwhelmed at this moment. And I heard that voice again. And he said, Aaron, this is what I've called you to. And it was the moment that God called me into ministry. And so we were feeding out of the back of our vehicles for the next few months, just loving people. People were coming to Christ. People were getting healed. Crazy stuff. And all we had was like hot cocoa and some sandwiches out of the back of our car, right? Like it was church, but in the streets. And God told me, he said, you need to find a central location to feed these people. And I'm like, okay. And so we pull around towards a park where all the homeless shelters are at down here in Joplin, Missouri. And it was a central park where, you know, some homeless people came to hang out. And so the first week, you know, we had 30 people show up once word got out. You know, the second week, 50 showed up. The third week, 75 people showed up. The fourth week, 100 people showed up. I mean, it just grew and grew and grew to where hundreds of people were coming every Sunday, not only to receive a meal, but hear the word of God and get prayed for and have miracles happen. And it become one of the first street churches here in Missouri.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
What a great story.
Yeah.
Hey, if people want to know more about your story, where can they go? Do you have some sort of online presence they can find?
I do. So I have a website, and it's authoramgarcia.com. You can go on there. You can check out my bio, check out the ministries. You can also read my blogs, my podcast. I've also started a podcast called Burn Notice. And just a place where you can come. If you want me to come to your city, love to come and speak to your church or any kind of organization, events, things like that. So the Lord started telling me, he says, after I was going through all these things, he says, you need to write a book. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I got a C in English. Like, you got the wrong guy. You need to pick somebody else. Because he said,
That's
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Like me,
wrong
write a
guy.
book? Yeah, I don't think so.
And man, that went on for like 3 months. Aaron, I need you to write a book. And he told me, he says, if you write the book, I will take it places you've never dreamed of before. And wrestled with God. And my wife, after church one day, she goes, I'm really tired. I'm going to lie down, which was really kind of uncommon for her at this time in our lives. And she laid down, and I looked over at the bar in our kitchen, and my laptop happened to be open that day. And the voice of God told me, now. And I walked over to this laptop, and I just The first like 4 chapters of my life. And that would go on to getting editors, that would go on to getting book designers. And I wrote my first novel memoir back in 2015, and it's called Coincidence or God. And it's the autobiography of the things that I've shared with you today.
Wow.
So the book started taking off. It became an Amazon bestseller, just being self-published. Obviously, God had a plan for it. Not only that, but we have now co-founded a ministry called Not by Coincidence Ministries, where to this date and it just started last year, we've gotten over 500 books of that book into the prison system.
Wow, that's quite something.
Yeah, and it's just setting men free. We get it to chaplains. We have, I think now, at least 6 states and over like 30 prisons that have received this book. And it's transforming men's lives. They're understanding that they're not alone. And they can relate to my story because addiction does the same thing to everybody.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so I wrote my first book in 2015. And then he says, a couple of years later, he says, I want you to write another book. And I'm like, here we go again. And I was getting a vision, and it was like walking into a movie theater, and it said burn notice on there. And I'm like, that is a weird name. And he says to me, you need to journal the next 3 years of what I'm about to do in your life. And I just started journaling miracles, journaling the movements like the S.O.S. Ministries. That's what we called it. It was S.O.S. Ministries, serving on the streets. And that's what became our first nonprofit. But many miracles happened out of that. Many movements happened out of that. And so Burn Notice birthed in 2018. Actually, I self-published it, and I knew the message had weight, and I wanted to get the book into more people's hands. And so I started investigating, how do you get published? How do you get traditionally published? How do you get signed? Because I was reading everything that says it's impossible to get signed. And I'm like, okay, well, all things are possible with God. So I made a book proposal. I sent it out to literary agents, which are pretty much scouts for publishing companies. They're the ones that pitch those books to the publishing companies. And I got rejection after rejection after rejection. And then I waited a couple months, and God said, do it again. And so I put out a whole bunch of more book proposals to different, literary agents of my genre. And I got an email one day from a guy out of Colorado named Michael Eberling. And he's a big literary agent for publishing companies. He's gotten like Desperate Housewives signed and all kinds of different things. And he says to me in the email, he says, I believe that your book has great potential for great reach. I have a publishing company I want to pitch this to. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. That afternoon, I got a message from the CEO of Morgan James Publishing out of New York. He says, hey, I talked to Michael. I want to hear more about your book and about your life. And so I had an interview. It was a 30-minute interview on the phone a week later. And I didn't try to pitch my book. What I did was I shared my heart. I shared my life, and I shared about what this book is going to do for the body of Christ, for people. Not just believers, but non-believers, to understand there is a real God that's out there that does tangible things that can't even be understood nor seen with the human eye. And he interviewed me. He says, okay, I'm going to pitch this to my team, my administration, because they have to they have to pitch it because there's all kinds of different authors that are trying to get signed. So let me give you the impossibility in this. The literary agent gets 500 plus book proposals a month. He literally spends maybe 3 minutes per book proposal to look it over before he trashes it and moves on to the next thing. Morgan James Publishing only signs 150 authors every single year. Of the 150, they only sign 25 faith-based authors. And so they pitched it to the administration, and wouldn't you know, a week later, I got signed.
Wow.
So pretty cool.
What a great story. I mean, what a great story. I mean, truly, truly inspirational. Aaron, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story today. It's a story of inspiration, and it really, anyway, it's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. So quickly, if you had just one message to give to the people who listen, whether they're friends and loved ones of addicts or whether they're addicts, just one message, what would it be?
I would let them know that their life is meant something, that they have value. I believe that many people don't feel like they have value. And the Bible talks about sparrows of the air and how they don't do anything besides fly and eat, and the flowers of the field. They toil and spin, but they don't even produce any kind of cloth or anything like that. And he says, how much more valuable are you than sparrows and the flowers of the field? My life is not a coincidence. And the listeners now, their life is not a coincidence. What happens is we get off the right path and onto the wrong path. So all God is looking for, especially through my testimony that they're hearing now, is nothing more than a shift. He's looking for your eyes to get off the wrong path and back onto the right path. And he's wanting to walk with us side by side. And I hear people tell me, well, I've cried out to God and I've asked for help and I'm still stuck in my addiction. Well, my question really is do we truly have a heart that's ready to leave the old life and embrace the new one? And so I just want to let people know they have value, they have purpose, they have destiny, and you just need to come to a conclusion that God is good and that he's wanting to see the best in us. He wants the best for us, and no drug could ever take that place once you've tasted that the Lord is good.
That's awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to just give you a message, and that is Aaron told us that if you go to his website, and it's author, AUTHOR, AM for Aaron Michael, Garcia, Garcia, so it's author.amgarcia.com. There's a pop-up that comes up on his website that asks for your email. If you give him your email, he will send you a free electronic version of his first book, Coincidence or God, because there's way more to his story than we were able to tell today. But thank you so much for listening. If you have a loved one that needs help, needs treatment, please get them into treatment today. If you don't know where to send them, you can call our sponsor, Narconon Ojai, at 866-231-5924. Even if you end up going to a different treatment program, you can call Narconon Ojai and they will help you. They will help guide you to your next step. 866-231-5924. Thank you for listening and watching. We will be back again next week.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return, sponsored by Narconon Ojai. For more information on Narconon Ojai, call 866-231-5924 or visit www.narcononojai.org. Narconon is a non-12-step rehabilitation program based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard.